My name is Roberto Smeraldi, and I'm the co-founder and still director 20 years later of an organization called Amigos da Terra, Amazônia Brasileira, Friends of the Earth Brazilian Amazonia, which started in '89. And we started to work especially on the Amazon. We do not just work on the Amazon now, we work on environmental and development issues all across Brazil, but we still keep the Amazon name as per our foundation, because it was like the main focus of our organization in the early years, and it is still the most important area of our work.
And can you tell me what's amazing about the Amazon?
What is amazing usually in terms of public opinion and observers is the richness and the variety of resources. But what is amazing to me is the sense of opportunity that this offers to us. Opportunities to test in practice models that it is very difficult to test in practice in other parts of the world, and models for economic development, models for social development. So the Amazon still gives you an opportunity, and we might miss a very important opportunity for development in general, and for Brazil, also for Brazil to have to use its comparative advantage in terms of the global scenario. Brazil is becoming very well known because of soybean or eucalyptus plantations, or exploration of oil in deep water in the oceans. All technologies that Brazil showed that is able to dominate and in which was able to innovate. Curiously, we are not showing comparative advantages in area where we are the only ones who actually have the resources. So we compete with others on soy, with others on eucalyptus, on oil or other things, but we didn't develop technologies for the use of our biodiversity. I love very much an area of innovation and technology which is biomimicry, and nowadays is growingly important. I wrote a book on this last year, and the variety of forms of life that we have, if we invested seriously in research and in technology in the Amazon, would give us a huge potential in terms of biomimicry, which means integrating chains of industry and technology to our natural resource basis. So looking at natural resources not just as resources, but as a natural capital. While we usually think at them as a factor limiting our growth. So even those with some goodwill about the Amazon, some politicians or some entrepreneurs often tell me, okay, we need to pay a cost because the Amazon is very important, and we need to do something to cut on our profits or whatever, so that we can save the Amazon. And I used to tell them, you are maybe well intentioned, but you are completely wrong. you need to find ways to invest money, not in the Amazon destruction, but in how to use the forest. Nowadays we can use the forest only basically for a few things: timber, some fisheries, but we do not have economic chains integrated with our natural capital. So what is important to me about the Amazon is the opportunity.
Right on. And what environmental threats is the Amazon facing?
Traditionally, deforestation is the number one. The clear cutting, the conversion of forests. But nowadays we have a different modality called forest degradation. What is happening? That's also one of the reasons for which deforestation went down a bit over the last couple of years, because we have increased forest degradation, which is not a total clear cutting, but it is something like hair, a few trees standing. Actually it is, you put fire, you grow some grass, the cattle with the shade can work well, even better. And that's what's happening especially in Mato Grosso state. Not a total clear cutting, but a partial clear cutting. So you lose a lot of the environmental functions and services of the forest. You lose biodiversity. You put fire in those areas, but you have a number of trees still on, very high, large trees, resisting sometimes to fire. And you have you go with a little plane, you throw the seedling of the pasture, and you put the cows. So this is a new threat. It is a partial conversion. People don't call it deforestation, call it degradation, and it is not accounted within the clear cutting. So sometimes we say, oh, very good results this year in terms of reduction of deforestation, but I say, okay, it's not just that. We have to look at both figures. And the other thing is that we have a very important savanna type. You might have heard the Cerrado, which is unique to Brazil and part of Bolivia, etc. It's a dense savanna vegetation, which is heavily affected by expansion, especially of cattle ranching, and the conversion of these vegetation is not yet accounted in the official figures of rainforest conversion. But in terms of biodiversity and in terms of carbon emissions, it's very significant. If you talk about carbon emissions, 3 hectares of Cerrado are equivalent to emissions of 2 hectares of rainforest. So, I mean, it is very serious. And we had over the recent years an average estimated officially rate of conversion of Cerrado around 17,000 square kilometer per year, which is more than the average of the Amazon rainforests in the last few years. So these are threats that need to be considered, known, and accounted.
And why is the Amazon important for everybody?
I would say that the Amazon is not just a provider of climate, water, biodiversity services, which is rather obvious, but it's always good to remind everybody that it is. But what is often less considered is that the Amazon is home to amazing human culture and diversity, and this is of unparalleled value for our civilization. And only if you know the life of the populations that still exist in the Amazon, you can understand how critical is to the whole world to better know them, to better know and inherit their traditional knowledge that is so important in a world where the new frontiers of science need to explore for human health, for progress in agriculture, for whatever, for biomimicry, the knowledge that is partly dominated by the indigenous population. So I would not look at the Amazon as a zoo. The Amazon is The Amazon is not an empty space, as many think. It was heavily inhabited. Over recently we found in close to Manaus archaeological and historic signs of unknown civilizations from 9,000 years ago, because we had very low rivers this year due to the dry season, and it exposed areas that had never been actually seen, and the paintings and drawings were found of these populations. So we know a lot about the history here of the Amerindians in this part of Central America, or maybe I should say that we know a lot of the Amerindians in Mexico or in the Andes region, but we know very little about the history of the Amerindians in the Amazon.
Why is it significant?
Why is
Brazil significant for world biodiversity?
Okay. Brazil is home to the largest biodiversity on Earth. So we have, as a country, not just the Amazon, but we have the Atlantic rainforest, which is basically reduced to fragments. We have the Cerrado. We have the wetlands of the Pantanal. We have a very diverse coast, from the tropical to the temperate climates, and we have also another incredible type of vegetation, which is called dry forest, called the Caatinga, in the northeast of Brazil. So often people think, okay, Brazil has rainforest, which is similar to many tropical countries, but on top of these, it has also these other biomes, and it has all the interconnecting areas between them, which are often the most important, the so-called transition areas or contact areas between these different biomes. And so this is unique to Brazil, and I think that's why we have such a diversity that we know so little about.
You've been doing this for a long time. You've been fighting this battle for, pretty seriously. Why is this so important to you?
Exactly because I, worked for a long time. I always, try to avoid the type of thing, which is sometimes a bit romantic, of being attached to something because you work on it, and sometimes this can distort your views, and I always force myself to abandon my personal views and be pragmatic. And this is a daily exercise because, of course, I love the people, I love the experiences, the memories, the things, the people who died fighting with us on one or another campaign, and trying to be pragmatic. And having traveled all across the planet, I really think that the Amazon provides to me every time a surprise. Every time, a hidden treasure that I didn't know before, that nobody knew before, and that I'm able to identify a new product, a new wonderful fish I can eat, a new type of fruit I didn't know the existence of, a new amazing chili pepper that is used by one tribe and that has an incredible flavor. I love food, and I love very much the relation between the terroir and the ingredients, and the recently we had many important chefs coming to Brazil, and they were saying, look, we always try to invent new stuff with new culinary techniques, but here we can find new ingredients every day and new tastes and new flavor, which can give us opportunities to create new structures of taste through new fats, new oils, for decades. And we just work with butter and olive oil and a few other fats, and we do everything with those, and we have here like dozens. We did something on what we call oil diversity in the Amazon. This is just one aspect. So frankly, what makes the Amazon important to me is the fact that we always have new opportunities. We always have discover something new. It's enough that we keep our mind open and look for it.
If there's one thing about the Amazon that you'd want the entire world to know, what would it be?
Let us say that I would like to know that I would like the whole world knows that they are much closer to the Amazon than they think, and they are much more fastly remotely connected to it in terms of their consumption in the day-to-day than they think. So their impact on the Amazon, either positive or negative, can be much higher and effective or dangerous than they think. And this world was kind of drastically reduced in size, and by globalization, etc. And often we consider this obvious when we can decide that we go to spend 1 week the other end of the world to have holidays, but often it's not clear when we realize that what we do in at the supermarket shelf today immediately reflects, and not just in the long term, but today immediately reflects in something that we consider far from our day-to-day life, like the Amazon. So I would like that people realize they have a role and they directly impact the Amazon. This means not just to feel guilty, but also to understand their decision making in front of the shelf can be important as much as when they vote for politicians. But they vote every day at the supermarket by choosing something, and as consumers they make a big difference.
And is that by choosing things like soy or beef products or things that were made and manufactured there?
Unfortunately, we have lack of transparency in labeling and in general in trade chains, allowing consumers to know better what to choose. But technology is evolving rapidly. Nowadays, I was looking the other day, these gadgets. Now you can have there is something called Good Guide that you can apply it to the barcode of a product and know some information about the origin of it. So these things are coming faster, and the labeling is definitely going to be more and more important, and forms of certification also allow the consumer to distinguish. So I think that, for example, asking for transparency, asking your supplier of goods, your supermarket, if the beef has any certification of origin. I'm not saying you don't have to eat beef, or you don't have to eat any soy. You don't have to. It's not just not doing something, but is doing this in a conscious way. I mean, okay, I want to know where this comes from, and if I don't know it, when I don't know it, I prefer not to buy. So I want to buy when I'm informed and when I can see that the biofuel at the pump, the beef at the supermarket, the soy oil for my French fries or whatever, I know where they come from, and if they respond to certain sustainability criteria as a minimum. So that's one way to do it. But of course, it's also a matter of in general consuming in a more conscious way. We had an amazing change in the recent years as far as paper is concerned. 20 years ago, paper was really a disaster. Any paper on earth. Now it's still a problem in many cases. We still have many cases of unsustainable production of paper, but let's say that in my country 60%, in other countries a large share of the paper production, at least we know where it comes from. It's from controlled sources, thanks to certification. So it happened for paper. It didn't fully happen so far, but it's on that way. It started to happen it changed a lot. Brazil was an important coffee producer. It's very rare now to have coffee producers deforesting new areas or using slave labor or similar practices. Very, very, it happens, but it's rather rare. Why? Because the market started to organize itself in a way that certain practices, need to be avoided because certificates are not issued there. There is a transparency. So we need to have this for beef, we need to have this for soy, for the big commodities,
Anything you can tell me about reptiles and amphibians in Brazil?
Sorry, the
Anything
amphibians?
You can tell me about reptiles and amphibians in the Amazon?
About amphibians and reptiles. Well,
biomimicry.
I mean, the important thing is about reptiles and amphibians in Brazil, in the Amazon, is that the Amazon is not just forest and water. The Amazon is, in a large part, a mix of forest and water. This mix of forest and water, we call it várzeas, which means lowland flooded forest. This means that the same area is part of the year covered by water and part of the year is not. And it's not just a small riverine part. It's tens and tens of kilometers, and then it crosses with another river, so it makes a web. And the critical issue for amphibians and reptiles is the fact that you need to consider these areas as key for conservation. If you just consider the so-called dry forest versus the rivers, what happens? That's why, for example, what happens when we with these big dams. Some of those who build the big dams say, well, but I'm creating a reservoir here in an area which is already flooded part of the year. So it's not that bad because I'm not over expanding the water. I'm using for a permanent reservoir an area which is already being flooded. But that area which is already being flooded is exactly home to this mixed environment, which is the basis for most for this biodiversity. And when these become a reservoir for the whole year, you completely lose the floodplain forest type of vegetation. You completely lose the services which are provided to the local population by that type of water regime, and of course you make these animals to look for other habitats elsewhere. What happens if they find another habitat elsewhere? They might migrate. But if they do not, because, for example, you have a road building there, and that's what is happening often in these recent cases of large development works, you have no escape. So on the one hand, you have the cattle ranching coming with using fire, and so making that area not suitable because once a year fires enter the forest, not just in the pasture, but it enters the forest. It doesn't actually destroy completely the forest, but it how do you say, it impoverish the forest. It reduces the diversity of that forest. On the other hand, you have a road building, and there you have the dam, and then what happens to the amphibians and to the reptiles in the middle? They have no space for, and they usually heavily depend on other species since they're predatory, and they cannot survive. So the Amazon is marvelous in terms of this mixed environment, but this makes it very fragile. You cannot think that you convert the Amazon into a mix of lakes and dry areas. Water and forest are living together in the Amazon. Actually, I tend to consider sometimes biologists don't like this definition, but I tend to consider fisheries, for example, for the Amazon as a forest, part of the forest, because they would not exist without the forest.